Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Auckland Art Gallery Foundation cocktail chat. Hope you're enjoying our series. We've certainly been enjoying presenting them. I can't think of a better person to job share this role with than Mary Kisler. So thank you to Mary and to Penny for all the wonderful cocktail chats that we've had for now, and for all of you who have been joining us here. And so it's a great delight to welcome Reuben Paterson to this evening's cocktail chat. Have you got your cocktail there, Reuben?
Well, it's non-alcoholic, but yes, hurrah, everybody.
Here's to us.
To 5Ds.
Well, welcome, Reuben. It's wonderful to share this time of the evening with you. You're in New Plymouth there, and I can see that you've still got some sunshine coming in through the window, so that's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's just fading slowly over two majestic metasequoias. So it's a very romantic time of night here.
Oh, you might have to give us a little tour out the window a bit later on before it gets dark. But
yeah, it's slipping away.
Oh, well, look, it's my opportunity to introduce Reuben a little bit more to you. If some of our audience, I'm sure that you do know Reuben and his work, but Reuben's been working now for a long time with a very particular medium, the medium of glitter. Glitter. Do we say glitter dust, Reuben, or is it? What's the official term?
I did it first when I first started exhibiting with it, because I thought that it took it out of the stereotypical role that it takes up of child's play and craft and drag. So I did use that word, but now I've just gone back to honesty and just use the word. I just use it for what it is now.
Yeah, I like that. Well, Reuben graduated from Elam in 1997 and was originally living and working in Auckland for quite a long time. But soon after you graduated from art school, Reuben, you went on a trip to France, didn't you? Which was very, I think, I'm assuming quite an influential thing for a young artist to go and do. And I wondered if it was at that point that you got some perspective in this kind of new emerging art practice that you had, which brought together your kind of Maori whakapapa, but also the kind of Western European kind of art history that you might have been suddenly experiencing when you were in France on the Moët and Chandon Fellowship. Was that a crucial moment for you, bringing kind of the local and the global together?
Looking back at that, the trajectory was very fast-paced out of art school, but that's what I wanted. I was very, very hungry to live the life I dreamed of since I was born. Being an artist was always my focus, and art school was a very poignant part of that, because it was the first time I really got to play. And straight out of art school, I got a job at the New Gallery as a gallery assistant.
Right.
And just before leaving was Kaiarahi to the Goldie exhibition. That was over the road at the Auckland Art Gallery. So my history was definitely locked into the art world, but the residency, more than anything, gives young artists an extended amount of time to be absorbed in that vast international practice, which during the 90s was still really only available to us by book. I didn't grow up with a computer, and it wasn't until I think the 2000s that I even had a phone. So all of a sudden what Europe did was make the art world real. And so that's where I think I found my footing, that all of a sudden the bigger ideas, the expansive thinking, the ease of finding materials that were out of the box and unusual were easily accessible. So that has to be a big part of a trajectory. It made everything possible.
Was that the point that you started experimenting with the unusual medium at the time, which was the use of glitter? Was that something you accessed when you were in Europe, or was that something that came about through a found opportunity or circumstance in New Zealand?
That was at Elam.
Oh, it was back in the Elam days.
So during the 90s, it wasn't an education that was conceptually focused, it was play focused. And that suited me perfectly. So it was about learning how to take critique mostly, and then learning how to create a practice informed by what you made and where that could go. And playing was a really big part of that for me. So that's when I first started to play with it. And I chose to do printmaking in my second year and was using it in silkscreen then. And then in my third year, I guess would say was my most playful, because I was, as a child of the 70s, I'm very attached to 70s aesthetic. So I was playing around with expandable foams and a lot of craft materials that then just grew to become more sophisticated the more I got to play with them. My last year was all about the airbrush, so there wasn't any glitter in those works at all. But as a child of the 70s, or growing up through the cusp of the early 80s and always finding the colours of the 70s just that little bit unobtainable, I was really glad when I got my marks back at the end of my degree and they spelled ABBA. It just seemed to work perfect.
Oh my God, that's brilliant. Thank goodness for those 2 Bs that you got. Yeah.
I know.
You would have never been so thankful for 2 Bs ever to have
it all made sense, you know.
Oh, that totally makes sense. Yeah. Well, Reuben, I'm really interested that you're using the word play, and that play became such an important part in that kind of experimental, exploratory time in learning to become an artist. Because actually, after you finished Elam, you went and did a teaching qualification, didn't you? And you became a teacher. And I actually think that's when I first met you, was at the Auckland Art Gallery, and you were running a workshop program, I think. And by then you were using glitter. And I remember looking at you and thinking, but noticing that even your eyelashes and your eyebrows and everything, you were completely covered in head to toe with glitter. And there was a kind of sense of joy about the way you shared the making process in that workshop that I remember witnessing. That must have been a long time ago.
Well, yeah, it must have been, because that is a material that is now banned.
Oh.
In education rooms, it's too prolific, as you can imagine. But it's those projects that created those bands, so at least I got a chance to do them once.
Yeah, well, that's true. Gosh. And so then, talking about you at the Auckland Art Gallery, you have a work in the collection at the Auckland Art Gallery, which dates, I wonder, from around about this kind of period, 2001 maybe.
Yes.
A glitter work that kind of brought in a sort of a pop aesthetic, very flat bodies of colour, but with a kind of kawaii feeling to it. So you're already there starting to kind of meld these 2 parts of your world together. Was this something that was really growing for you around this kind of time?
So in between, I'd done that Moet residency in France, which was 3 months. And then, in wanting to do that big OE, went and lived in England for 2 years.
Okay.
After that, and then came back and did my postgraduate diploma in primary school teaching.
Right.
So at the time, that ko whaiwhai work you're talking about was exhibited in Ngahiraka Mason's Pūrangi Aho, which was a formidable exhibition of contemporary Māori art from the 50s that is getting a resurgence again. As we look forward now with Nigel's show that will open up in December at the gallery, Toi Tu Toi Ora. on the back of Ngahi Raka's show. So, you know, we're 20 years on from that exhibition, but I was teaching then at Westmere Primary School and painted those works in the classroom. So I didn't have a studio at the time. So my during the school holidays is when I painted those works for that show.
So interesting to think that that work was possibly shown with other works from the 1950s. Having just been and seen the Te Schoon exhibition, which the foundation are going to be doing a visit to up at Te Uru recently. I went back on the first day they opened. It was so good to be in a gallery again.
Oh, yes.
And they had, you know, those works like the Selwyn Muru works and some of those early Te Schoons that had that quite clear outline divider in terms of a building up of a pattern quite flat across the surface. So I was going to ask you, were the who were some of your kind of colleagues that you came out of art school with? Were you all sort of sharing this kind of thinking together?
I think there was definitely playful art relationships. You know, my year wasn't incredibly prolific for students who wanted to make a career out of being an artist. It was Stella, oh, and I've forgotten her last name. Stella Brennan.
Yeah.
Was, I think, the only one from my year. But then the year before there was many. There was Annie O'Neill, Yuking Tan, Denise Kum, Daniel Malone, Giovanni, and then of course that was tied in with the test strip days. So everything was very, very exciting back then. And if you look at those artists' works, a lot of them are very material based and a lot of handwork, but a lot of joy. Joy is definitely a valid component of a lot of the works that those artists make.
Yeah, I almost wonder if that was a sort of a late 90s thing. There was a kind of hedonism or something in the world.
There was a complete hedonism, and it was about dress ups and fun, and it was like catching up with the 70s again, I think, for all of us. It was the days of Verona, and it was like Auckland had a new scene, and Rosanna was doing Planet magazine. There were all of these new voices that were being heard. World had just started their store, so fashion was finding a voice as well. It was like everything was triggered at the same time for me.
But also, Reuben,
was triggered.
Yeah, I kind of think in terms of thinking about triggering all sorts of things going on was that you've always been an artist who's been interested in collaborations. And you mentioned world, you know, and also breaking down boundaries perhaps so that these collaborations can happen between fashion, between ideas about pattern making and design and aspects of object making that cross over boundaries. Is that something that you're still interested in?
Very much. I think there are opportunities. I'd hate to think that my art world was so precise that it only had one path. It is really like the branches of a tree. It's an endless exploration that I want to be involved with as much as I possibly can. It's we caught up the other day, and I talked about an art life being very organic and having its own life and its own path and its own interests that it wants to pursue. So I like the idea of keeping things very open and very fluid and allowing it to be a response to an artwork or create a response for an artwork. It's a complete cycle of inspiration, and inspiration has to be completely open for it to work. And I get sick of my own bubble. I think that people's connection to my work or vice versa just does that same thing again and opens those cycles right up.
Yeah, but Reuben, you've got to be open to those opportunities. So are you a person who says yes to everything or a person who says no to things?
I think that I go through phases. of being a yes person and a no person. At the moment, I'm a yes person with some maybes thrown in. So I'm being a little bit more paced, and I won't use the word cautious, although that's the one thing that's come to mind. In the past, I've always said yes because they allow opportunity. And it's like, well, what will happen within this opportunity for the work? Where could the work go? The work is very free. My work is free ranging. It's just allowed to be, and that's where the inclusivity gets really interesting. And I think maybe it comes back to art school again. Really enjoying honesty, really enjoying the opinion of others, valuing myself as an opinionated person. They're all like value systems that are there just for the work.
And then, Reuben, I think, I can imagine that what's happened over quite a long period of time is that all of these opportunities were being embraced. You're very open to all sorts of new things. There's public art projects happening and huge walls down at the Newmarket railway station or the Manukau city centre, so you've got big public artworks. I remember the work that you did at Escape, kind of a eye-popping, amazing patterning of things on the ground. But now we've had this different experience about being in a more isolated situation, being at home in lockdown. How has that affected your thinking about all of this? You might have had a lot of deadlines that might have had to have slipped by into a kind of a slightly different zone of thought. Where are you at with approaching this kind of time?
I think it's an interesting space where either as artists we are in control of what has been created, or as happens to be the case for a lot of projects I'm working on at the moment, they're being funded by very important trusts who support practices of a lot of valuable New Zealand artists. I've come to understand the visionary of these trusts, to live in the hope that through all of our shared experience of this moment, the one thing we still want to look forward to is experiencing the grandeur of art. And those public work is becoming a lot more prominent in our centre cities and even in the regions. They're more exciting in the cities because there's more money, which allows for greater experimentation and a bigger experience for both the art and the people who encounter them. It's I don't think that my world hasn't stopped thinking big.
Yeah.
And so, but it is based, like I said, on the vision of the trusts or the benefactors who are letting these things navigate through this, so we have artistic outcomes on the other side, if that's what you meant by your question.
Yeah. And also, Reuben, I mean, you've always been a busy person, but you've had to slow down. You've had to sort of rethink. And I wonder if that's influenced the kind of art making that you've had happening during lockdown. Maybe, thinking about, you've reached a certain point where you've got to just kind of stop and think and look at what you can make in this lockdown period. So what have you been working on there in your home and studio and garden in New Plymouth during lockdown? What's been your focus?
Well, I did have a year planned, and everything about the year completely changed, and I was fine with that. And so quite early on, I did actually find I got quite organized in that I I was packing a pantry and getting my freezer filled
Yeah.
with food. I sort of treated it a little bit apocalyptically,
Yeah.
but I have grown into, as a 46-year-old, a more isolated person.
Uh-huh.
And I really enjoy it. And you know that you've heard it before, that artists, of course, we perform in that space day to day, very, very comfortably. So I was like this, bring it on. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was quite excited at having to do it, and so planned. And I hadn't thought about the type of pace that would take over that experience of isolation. But the thing I chose to do was worked so beautifully in parallel with it. And I do have a garden that I just love very, very deeply, and had been looking after some gourds that I've been growing. And these gourds are a heritage seed. They're called ngapuhi, and they grow to be very, very, very big. So I was tending to them alongside my garden, and I have some photographs to share of that, actually.
Yeah.
And of the dried gourds I had, I was sequining them, and the process of sequining began when I lived in Greece for 2 years, and have had bouts of leaving behind and then returning back to. So I sort of have made a return to them again. And much like knitting or crochet, it's a physical procedure of patience and repetition that doesn't necessarily involve the mind. So you can let your ears do the walking as your eyes watch each pin collect a sequin and get nailed into the skin of a gourd. So that's that, along with a lot of listening, is what took up a lot of my time during isolation.
And Reuben, it might be a nice time to put the images up, and we can talk through them while people see the images of the gourds. There's the garden.
This is just a
right.
snippet of my garden. These beautiful dahlias at the front, like dinner plate, the size of dinner plates. But if you haven't yet seen them, there are 2 very large gourds sitting on the roof, sort of center picture, catching the sun and doing their growing. And here is, I guess, a photo I took during the process. So I sit here with my towelette, which helps me pin through each hole. So I have to pick up a pin.
Yeah.
Not all pins are created equal too. So I actually have to use my thumb as a measure to make sure that that top lip of the pin is thick enough to not go right through the hole. It's like, it's pretty laborious. And then pick them up one by one and hammer them into the skin. And the skin, of course, varies from top to bottom. So the very top, you sort of have to use about 10 pins just to sort of try to drill your way through. But it is just, it's a very peaceful experience. And as you will probably see when you go to Teo's show, there might be carved hui there. There might be drawn hui with drawings on them. I sort of have assimilated this really slow practice to being something like that of carving. And although I don't proclaim to have any traditionalist skills when it comes to my Māori descent, I feel like I've found these alternates that continue the same spaces and the same time frames that those intricate decorative elements had on traditional Māori artworks.
Mm. In fact, up at the Teo Schoon exhibition, they've got the film from the National Film Unit of Teo using the, the little kind of printmaker's tool, which is a V-shaped tool to scoop out. And in a way, it's very much like each kind of round shape that each sequin plays on the surface of your one. It's a repeating pattern. And I love your description about your mind, sort of partly your mind being occupied while a big part of your mind is not, and your kind of alertness to your senses being involved. In a way, it's a little bit like the process of when you're driving a car on a long journey. There's a certain part of your kind of default brain that's making sure you've got your indicators on and your windscreen wipers and that you're actually staying on the correct side of the road. But there's a big part of your brain that can drift into a more kind of daydreaming aspect. And so what was your experience? Because I mean, you told me that you've made 14 of these, and 14 and a half of these.
They unusually they pull out an eagerness in you. And there's I don't knit, but I imagine it's very similar in that once you get started, you want to finish. You want to see it as a complete object. And so these gourds got me really excited, and I sort of like go for it because I want to see them as their finished object. So I sort of set a number of 10 at the start of isolation, but like an Olympian, broke that and got the gold medal.
You went for a PB.
Just wondering if I have some. I wanted to show you this one because I think a lot of people are very interested in what it would look like on the inside. So this is how this is one that I broke many years ago. And so you can see all of those pin-like teeth piercing that interior surface, which knocks the seeds off the shell, and inside, and places all the seeds inside. So you have a very kinetic object in that it as you move around it responds because light catches each circular sequin. But you can actually manhandle it and make noise, and they're very much like a rainmaker. If we get a chance, I have one to my right, so I can like give it a tip and a top.
Okay. Show us,
Can you see me?
Yes.
Oh, you can still see me. So this is like one that's halfway done. This is a pear-shaped gourd, and this is the sound. Can you hear that?
Yeah. That's fabulous, isn't it? Well, of course, Reuben, you're really referencing to me the incredible history of the gourd. I mean, it's been used. I was thinking about how maracas, kind of Latin American maracas as a musical instrument, but also the sitar on the Indian continent is another musical instrument that uses parts of gourds to build in the way they're built. And a lot of kind of xylophone instruments throughout Asia have the gourd. So in terms of that kind of musical resonance, did the early Maori use gourds as a musical instrument? Is there a kind of a wind instrument connection?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, it was used as a wind instrument, and you imagine the bigger the body, the deeper the resonant of it. Do you know that a lot of the tune? Did you know that the word rangi can be used to translate as the word tune?
No.
And so its reference is into a sound being made here on the earth, on Papatuanuku, but travelling up into the realms to rangi.
Oh, right.
Which is quite a beautiful way for sound to connect those primeval parents and whakapapa. But I've always really appreciated the idea of that the the ko'owo, which is another wind instrument that could be played through the nose or the mouth, and the hui as an instrument played the landscape. So as we think of Western music having a scale, the landscape was read very much the same way. So the eyes would follow the horizon line of, say, a ridge or a mountain, and because it peaks and descends, that landscape was played in the same way, so that the sounds produced were either heightened or deepened to, I guess, give the land's lines a hearing sense about them.
A rhythm, a rhythm of, I think, make me think of McCann's Landscapes and Variations. If I've got the, I might have the title wrong, but there's that sense of, I think it's quite a musical work where there's the classic McCann hills, but they're dipping and diving and repeating in a very sequential musical kind of notation way. And I love that idea that that's the rhythm of the land and the landscape that's being drawn out in this.
Be played.
And so in a way, what you're doing is you're bringing this kind of rhythm of nature with the gourd form itself into the kind of nightclub musical feel of the sequins as well.
I guess, yes. Well, you know, they're strongly associated to dances, but I am very interested in trying to take control of these materials and offer new readings for them. I do think that historically we are so used to the things we live with, we almost take them for granted, if I could just say that so succinctly. And it's allowing things to have a greater voice. It's, you know, I do the same thing with glitter. I've often started to talk of it as having a whakapapa, that glitter too has a genealogy, and the manufacturer in the United States that I buy my material from started their business out by cutting up aluminium into chaff, into very fine pieces of aluminium that were thrown out the back of aeroplanes to disrupt radar during World War II.
Oh, wow.
Glitter doesn't have glitter just because it's used or performed with in drag or child's play or craft doesn't mean that it's from there and that it has to inhabit those zones. So I'm sort of just wanting to awaken it. And rather than think our world is all closed off and finished in regards to the imagination, that we've still got a lot more things to explore.
Yeah, I love that idea that there's a history to it, because Reuben, my other kind of reading of these works is that you're kind of putting a skin across this natural form. It's in a way, it's a sort of sense of camouflage.
Yes.
And I think about the early history of camouflage, which I'm actually really interested in, and that also has an early military, obviously an early military connection, but it was a connection that artists in the 1920s and 30s worked with psychologists to understand the role of perception and aesthetics and the psychological way that we perceive things. And
is
this
that Gestalt?
Yeah, that Gestalt, which I kind of think of in terms of your interest or your work. Was that something that you could see was a way of kind of bringing everything to exist and happen all in one moment of existence?
Very much so. Yeah, I think that Gestalt is all about how we perceive things when we see them as a whole, particularly, you know, as example, optical art, and that role it has when it starts to fluctuate and become a whole new visual form in itself. That way of relieving our perception to allow the way we do look at things and the way that we encounter things to have a grander sense of integrity within our lives.
And also, Reuben, a kind of a sense that the existence is there in a kind of fulsome sort of way. Like I think about the way camouflage was used on those ships, you know, the camouflage.
Oh, exactly.
Radical
I'm just
pattern.
curious, is it my screen that's just frozen, or is everybody
Yeah, I
frozen?
think you might have you've seemed to have frozen on me.
Oh,
Am I
okay.
frozen? Yeah, you
As long
seem
as
to
you
have.
can still hear me, that's good.
Yeah,
I might
I hear.
stop the video. I think all the teenagers are playing um, computer games.
Oh, right. Do you want to flick through some of your other images, Reuben, and then if you close your images, that after that it
Unfortunately,
might
I'm all
bring.
frozen, so
Oh, I see.
I can't even escape out. I might just have to leave it there for a moment. Sorry,
That's all right.
but I'm glad you can still hear me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this reference about, I mentioned the word camouflage almost on, you know, in particular, Reuben, because when we had an earlier conversation this week, you talked a bit about how lockdown had made you start to sort of think about the real truth of being an artist, and what you wanted to achieve as an artist, this kind of sense about what was truth, and that maybe there was a lot of things that were kind of camouflaging this ability to get to a sense of truth about art and art making. Have you got thoughts about that? I know it's kind
I
of a
think that
deeper
it's
level,
like,
but
it's not something that I've heard enough of, and I'm so keen to hear about the, like, what we could call the demons and our existential crises that have risen for everybody during this period. I find that a fascinating moment that we all share in just becoming better people. I
do
guess.
you think,
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, do you think one of the things that has been really important to you, and I think it's connected to your work so deeply now, is your connection with your garden, with nature, with things growing, with the landscape around you? How important does that remain to you?
Oh, it just keeps getting deeper and deeper each season. You know, we are a part of, you know, 4 seasons, and oh, I might be coming back. And that cycle, that's I'm just constantly aware that it takes me a year to remember how beautiful last year was in my garden. And it's because here in Taranaki, I now live in such a special, and you might have just heard a duck flying by. You know, it is a bit of an ecosystem. There's a stream, there's birds, incredible bird life. Just recently got some chickens. It's I feel very connected to the land, but that connection also keeps me very connected to my father, who was a landscaper. And I think particularly as next year I'm going to be the same age that he was when he passed. And for probably the last 5 years, I've been thinking about that a lot more.
That's a significant moment. Yeah.
Yes, just as a cycle. And I know that a lot of people who have lost parents or loved ones would have thought and felt the same way. So I connect, I guess, through people, to people through my garden as well. But it demands a lot of love from me. It is a relationship you have to enter into in order to get something out of.
I think there's always that sense of balance, perhaps, in your work between that, which is, in my mind, a kind of metaphor for what you're talking about, really. There's this kind of sense of intensity and joy, but there's always a kind of a other side to it. It takes work, you know, it can be laborious.
Nothing
And
is
you
all
have
like gleamy and shiny, is it? You know, it's there've been some very interesting science papers that have looked at why we are possibly so attracted to things that are glossy and things that are shiny. And in those experiments, they'd like to they pointed to the fact that it was because water was such an essential need of ours we have something within us that's always looking out for it. So whenever we notice something sparkling, it's not so much a pretty beauty attraction, but a survival attraction. So I thought it was quite interesting. But ever since I've started looking at this material, at glitter or sequins, I have really had to reevaluate my the value I put on it denoting pretty, because I think that pretty often defines something lacking in substance. So it's this battle you almost have to play.
It's like an evolution process, which is perhaps what you're referencing there. And, you know, I think that these kind of abstracted forms of the gourds certainly reach into that sense for sure. So Reuben, I think we may have a question from our group, which we could perhaps merge into to see if we've got a response from anyone here. We've got questions. Mary, you've got a comment, haven't you?
Yeah, Reuben, I really wanted to ask you, I'm fascinated by your images that you've put up on screen, and in the work that we can see now, the blue gourd is very, in a sense, it's contained and it's photographed in such a way that there is light reflecting from the sequins themselves, but they're not reflecting into the space. But there was an earlier one that I found absolutely transfixing, and the way it had been photographed meant that serendipitously these little sort of flashes of gold light had gone off to one side. And I wondered if you ever do you ever display them deliberately in such a way that light is reflected against something, or are you more interested in the contained form?
I think more recently I am now. And I used to work with very, very small sequins that didn't have as grand effect as those gold ones did, because they lace like you're looking at water reflecting from a pool or a pond into an interior. And there's nothing as beautiful as watching, as being able to capture that moment when the sun is in just the right moment. So very much now, Mary, I'm very, very interested in being able to play with the space that surrounds it a lot more. I think that it makes really lovely connects to the stars, which of course, you know, I like to, in a Māori trajectory, have my glitter talk to things in the natural world like that also, and to navigation and to space, just the space.
But there's also a sort of wonderful juxtaposition with the sort of exquisite containment and a reflection that in fact none of us can ever control. Which is what I sort of philosophically and emotionally, I really respond to that kind of notion, and I think it's fascinating.
It can do quite a few opposites in one go. And I guess
that's what I think I enjoy about your work, Reuben. It's that play between opposites always. That's happening. In fact, a good example that we could use as we finish our conversation this evening would be the work that's you produced as actually the first commission for the Auckland Art Gallery Foundation, the first edition. And several foundation members will own an edition of this work, the beautiful rose, which is embedded with glitter and resin.
I'm sorry I can't show you. My screen is just like putting up a good freeze fight.
Oh dear, we've gone into a frozen moment, but we can imagine that the opposites that go on in a way in that work too, Reuben, you know, between this kind of timeless sense of beauty, but then a kind of wondering about what happens to that time.
Very much. I think the rose is such a formidable, metaphoric, symbolic item and visual, it's hard to take it and try to do something new again with it. You have to base its story and history in order to try to project it somewhere else, which I think this work does, because it's luxurious and dark, but it still reflects back at you.
Yeah, a kind of velvety sense of such a quintessential image, but as you say, how to introduce a new reading for it. And so, Reuben, what's happening for you now? You've got exhibitions perhaps in the next few months to work on at the galleries that you show with?
There is a few coming up. Everything has been rescheduled, of course, but I'm working on some really exciting projects with the Auckland Art Gallery, and that's about as far as I can go on that.
Right. Yeah. Watch this space.
But I have just really been enjoying the new pace. So instead of being in the studio, which is in our New Plymouth Centre, I've just found I've been home a lot, finishing some other proposals. I guess, I feel like I'm just gathering myself, just slowly finding the momentum again to sort of participate a little bit more fully. Yeah.
I think we're all in that boat, Reuben. There's a sort of sense of a kind of a mindfulness that you sort of get in living in this moment, wondering what's going to happen from one day to the next, but then at the same time kind of projecting forward to anticipate things to come.
Yeah, hoping to take a little bit with you.
Yeah. Well, we're going to anticipate seeing your work at the Auckland Art Gallery. You're also going to have work in Nigel Burrell's exhibition that will be taking over a lot of the spaces in the gallery, contemporary Maori art exhibition. We're really looking forward to seeing that.
Oh, me too.
And we'll look forward to seeing you in Auckland soon. And for those of you who are interested, we're heading up to Uru to see the Te O Schoon exhibition. You'll be able to see more gourds there, and we'll hear from Hamish Coney, of course, who has a great knowledge about Schoon's use of gourds. And we'll be thinking of you too, Reuben, when we're there.
Oh, thank you. And apologies for the screen.
Well, we can't do anything about that.
I know.
I think we all manage incredibly well. And, the thing about Zoom is that it's enabled a connectivity, even if it's a slightly frozen connectivity. We're connecting with you there in New Plymouth. So thank you so much for all your time.
And thank you all for coming along.
Reuben.
Thank you so much.
And Sue, thank you both very, very much. It's been absolutely fascinating, and just love the gourds. Looking forward to seeing them when we can. And just to let you all know that next week we have Mary Kisler talking with Anna Miles about two of her artists that she's been thinking a lot about during lockdown. So thanks again for joining us, and see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.